Alrighty, welcome everybody. Thanks for your patience while we took a minute to give more attendees a chance to get here. I want to welcome you to the first of what we think is going to be a series of webcasts on hybrid headaches, led by our own Michael Van Horenbeeck. We came up with the idea of doing a hybrid headaches focused series of webcasts and blog articles because although, I'm trying to think of how to put this diplomatically, if you look at the Office 365 workloads, the hybrid experience for Exchange is far better than the hybrid experience for Skype or especially for SharePoint. I think this reflects a lot of positive things that the Exchange product group has done over time. I mean, we were the first people to get PowerShell. We were the first people to have a best practices analyzer. Exchange has led the way in a lot of really important ways as we've started to see a transition from an enterprise product that could only be used by small enterprises to the massive beast that Exchange is today. But along the way, it would be disingenuous to pretend like hybrid Exchange is perfect and like everything just magically works. There are a lot of headaches, for want of a better term, that arise when you start trying to do full-blown, complex hybrid deployments. And Michael, in his role as Dr. Van Horenbeeck, has run into a rather ridiculous number of them. I think I should point out, Michael was kind enough to put an asterisk here. He is not actually a medical doctor. I don't believe he stayed at a Holiday Inn last night, so I don't know that he can claim credit for that either. But he is the director of product research at ENow Software, where he oversees our product research and competitive analysis efforts and spends a lot of time talking to people about the kind of challenges that they face in doing hybrid deployments of Exchange and Office 365. He's a longtime Exchange Server MVP and holds the coveted but sadly departed Certified Solution Master credential for messaging. Although I hear any minute now Microsoft Learning is going to bring something like that back, so I guess that remains to be seen. You can follow him on Twitter at Van Horenbeeck, and then he blogs both at blog.enowsoftware.com and at vanhorenbeeck.com. So without taking up any more of anybody's valuable time, I'm going to go on mute and turn the presentation over to Dr. Van Horenbeeck.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate the intro. And hi, everyone. Welcome to this, as Paul mentioned, the first in hopefully a long series of webinars. So, as Paul already mentioned, we're going to talk about some of the common situation problems that I've noticed in hybrid deployments. And I'm pretty sure that if you've been working with hybrid Exchange, whether it's in 2010, 2013, even 2016, you've run into at least one or two of them already. And if you haven't, then I'm pretty sure you will at some point, because the ones that we see here are fairly common. So what you will see is that most of the slides are based on two things, right? The cause of the hybrid headache, and then I'll explain why it is a problem, how it came to be a problem, or why it still is a problem today. Some are bugs, some are known limitations. And then we're going to talk about how you can work around or solve the problem if there is a solution. More often than not, it's more based on a best practice, avoiding an issue, of course, because a lot of the issues that we will talk about is something that you can control yourself, things that could happen due to a lack of understanding of how certain things work. And sometimes it's just plain right a bug in some feature in Exchange, in Office 365, that I think you should be aware of. So over time, these bugs will get cleared, but as software gets written and gets enhanced, new bugs will find their way and create all sorts of other new fun stuff. So without any further ado, let's dive into the first problem, and this is more of a generic one, kind of easing into the more technical stuff that we're going to talk about today, but it's the featuring parity, right? When you take a look at Exchange, how it used to be back in the early days when Exchange 2010 Status Spec 1 was the first version of Exchange that you could deploy in a hybrid configuration, albeit with 60-something manual steps that you had to perform yourself. Unfortunately, I was one of the lucky few who had to go through the pain, and after long, endless days and nights, sometimes you could get it to work, sometimes you couldn't. But the point is that then Exchange on premises was the rule of the Exchange world, if you will. What you could do on premises was far better than what you could do in Office 365 at that point in time. However, the scale tipped in favor of Office 365 very soon after. When you take a look at the features that are available, all sorts of features, of course, in Office 365, then it greatly outweighs what you can do on premises. And that outs itself when moving mailboxes to Office 365. And I believe we lived through the pain only recently at ENow, where we moved a couple of mailboxes to Office 365. And, that's when you start realizing that unified messaging is a really great example. Although exists on premises and exists in Office 365, moving a mailbox that is enabled on premises isn't just that easy. It is when you recreate all the related stuff in Office 365, like the dial plans and all the policies, you should be able to move them over. But then again, the question is, how are you going to use unified messaging in Office 365? Are you going to use your on-premises link environment? If you're in the US, are you going to switch over to Skype for Business Online using the new voice capabilities that Skype now offers? Those are all, big changes which can have an impact in how users work. Is that a problem? I don't think it needs to be with proper planning, but often these are, the little things that you can run into. And sometimes, disruption is needed. You sometimes need to disable first, move a mailbox, re-enable it afterwards. Or if you move, people and you decide to change their DID, for instance, in Skype for Business, that'll have an impact on those users as well. But that's inherently something due to the fact that there is a future in parity between on-premises and the cloud, and it'll only get bigger, right? We know that some features will never make it on-premises, like Microsoft said, Delve being one of them. And although that Delve as such is not maybe something that is really visible in your Outlook client, behind the scenes it does provide a lot of value. And people who get used to working with features that exist, they will start complaining about losing those features if you ever decide to move them back. I'll cite a situation with a customer. It's a bit ago, I'd say about a year ago, who made the decision to move back to on-premises. And yes, they exist. The problem was that, in the time they had their users in Office 365, they got so used to a certain set of features that moving back was really painful for them. So that can create some issues to deal with on a less technical but more organizational level, right? Of course, when we're talking about hybrid deployments, and I'm now not referring to hybrid as as a paradigm, because hybrid IT, parts in the cloud, parts in on-premises, that is the paradigm by itself. But when we're talking about hybrid exchange, one of the components that comes into play is directory synchronization. And when you take a look at all the things that we're going to talk about today, you'll notice that, to me, directory synchronization is the root of all evil. And I don't mean that installing it is a bad thing. First of all, you need it for hybrid exchange, and it works really well. It's very robust. Over time, the installation runs pretty smoothly. There's not really anything that I can say against directory synchronization. However, it's once you start dealing with the aftermath of rsync, changing object attributes. It's when you dive into the little, the fine print of the contract that you have with directory synchronization, if you will, that you'll discover some little odd things, little oddities that can make your life really miserable. One of them being the synchronization delay. By now, everyone's used to the fact that rsync runs every 3 hours, and that's fine. I mean, unless you are adding users on a minutely basis, I don't think that's a problem that you'll have to wait by default 3 hours before objects get synchronized to Office 365. And quite frankly, if it's really an urgent sync that you have to make, you can force the sync. You've always been able to do that. So that is fine too. And as far as I understand, Microsoft is looking into lowering that number while working with support. Apparently, you can maybe get it down to a 1 hour default. But then again, I don't think 3 hour by itself is a problem. However, the result of that is that some processes, let's take the creation of an archive, is something that can take up to 6 hours. So when you take a look at Exchange Online Archive or Exchange Archiving, let's call it Exchange Archiving on premises, you enable an archive, and within a matter of minutes, that archive is available to the end user. They just have to do a new auto-discover lookup. They find the new archive, pops up in the client, and you're good to go. When you do that in Office 365, more specifically when you enable an archive for an on-premises mailbox, it works a tad differently. So first thing that you do is you enable the archive, but you don't do that directly in Office 365. You're essentially modifying the on-premises object to be a mailbox user with an archive, which then synchronizes to Office 365 at the next synchronization interval. There, Office 365 picks up on that change and sees, oh, right, it's no longer just a mailbox on premises, but they need me to provision an archive. So let me go ahead and create that archive. So by now, anywhere between a few minutes and 3 hours have passed, and Office 365 created the archive. But at that point in time, the on-premises mailbox still doesn't know there is an archive in Office 365 or what the archive details are. It's not until the second synchronization, after the archive has been created, that these archive details are written back into the on-premises environment. And at that point, these archive, or the archive, better said, becomes available to that mailbox after a new auto-discover lookup. So is that a problem? No, but it's something that you should be aware of, right? Because if you're telling your users, yeah, it'll be available right away, then you need someone who kicks off directory synchronization twice in a matter of a few minutes. Whereas you want to avoid doing that, right? If you have a first-level support team, then you don't want them to go to the DirSync server, have to initiate a manual synchronization every time that happens. You just want to make sure that people know that. So in this case, tell them that it can take up to a day, 6 hours, 7 hours before the archive becomes available, and you should be fine. And that's just one of the examples that that is a direct result of the synchronization schedule or delay, if you will. Sync issues, of course, of all sorts, duplicate objects, they can, make your life miserable. Miserable in terms that DirSync has a pretty neat way of dealing with duplicates. If directory synchronization is not sure what to do with an object, it'll rather not do anything with it rather than just overwrite stuff. Of course, that is provided that you leave things at its default, that you're not fiddling with the object GUIDs and the source anchors yourself. Then you should never be able to, theoretically, that is, of course, lose any data. But you will see those incomplete synchronizations where you get, completed with exceptions, completed with whatnot statuses that tell you, hey, there is a subset of users that we couldn't write to Office 365, or maybe some, attributes that couldn't be written back to on-premises because of missing permissions. So that's definitely something that can be attributed to directory synchronization as well. But thirdly, and that's probably the most common cause of some of the support calls or questions I've seen, is that the limited understanding of how DirSync works, what the scope of DirSync is, and how it works in conjunction with Office 365 is what could cause some major damage. So let's take an example here, right? Or before doing that, let's first take a look at how to create objects, because that's probably a very good segue into the synchronization process itself. So the first problem or question that I hear a lot is, yeah, well, we're a rather small organization, or we want to get rid of Exchange altogether. Can we do that? Well, by now I think people are, starting to get up to speed that hybrid server, although there is no such thing as a hybrid server, is still required to do that, to create objects or modify objects in a supported way. And the reason for that being is very simple. In order to, so once you have directory synchronization enabled, in order to make changes to those attributes, you need a interface, a tool, which can make appropriate changes to those objects, and then those changes are being synchronized to Office 365. And the reason why you need to do that on premises is when you have DirSync enabled, then source of authority for those objects becomes the on-premises environment. Now think twice, which is the supported tool that allows you to make changes to on-premises objects, more specifically Exchange-related changes. Well, that's going to be Exchange, the Exchange management tools. Well, in order to run the Exchange management tools, you need that Exchange server on premises. You don't need a bunch of them. One is enough if you need high availability for your tools, and you need two of them, although, that is debatable. And, of course, that's when you get into a sort of catch-22 because you wanted to get rid of Exchange, yet you still need to keep that Exchange server, although it won't be performing or necessarily performing any Exchange-related features like Mailflow or hosting mailboxes. It's still there, right? Of course, alternatively, and that's the maybe poor man's solution or the more pragmatic approach, if you really want to get rid of Exchange, then yes, you could do that. The only caveat there is that you can't rely on Microsoft for full support. And the reason for that being is that any of the third-party tools that allow you to do management of mailboxes or attributes on premises, they will very likely do so in a very good way because they interact with those objects directly through, low-level editing, Active Directory, ADSI edit. You could do it yourself, right? And, the caveat there is it's not so important. Does it work? Sure. It's kind of like, pick your battles. Is support from Microsoft more important to you than being able to get rid of that Exchange server? It's a decision, where I tend to be on the fence. I personally, I'd rather keep that Exchange server because it doesn't really hurt you. It doesn't require all that much of work to keep that on premises. But of course, there's pros and cons to either of them. Moving forward, another problem which is directly related to DirSync and keeping that server on premises is you have a regular hybrid mailbox in Office 365, right? Let's call it Joe's mailbox, who's been moved over there a year ago, and Joe's happily singing along in Office 365. But then, for some reason, process, Joe left. I don't know why. You want to move or change that mailbox to a shared mailbox. Now, on premises, it would be very easy through the set mailbox-shared commandlet, and you're done. However, when we take a look at how that hybrid deployment works, we need to make a change to an on-premises object, which then gets synchronized to Office 365 in order to tell Office 365 that it's now a shared mailbox. So, theoretically, we would need something like a set remote mailbox-shared commandlet, but that doesn't exist. There is no such thing. Well, in that case, there are various situations to work around. First of all, you could move the mailbox on premises, convert it to a shared mailbox, and then move it back to Office 365, which, honestly looks like a lot of work to do that. Or you could take the alternate route, which might not be very supported, but just works beautifully, is manually changing the remote recipient type of that object to 100, and that actually means that the mailbox was moved from on-premises to Office 365 previously, but it's actually a shared mailbox. And once you do that, it gets synchronized to Office 365, and then that mailbox gets converted to a shared mailbox over there, just like that. So that is a really, quick and easy way to deal with it. Are there other ways? Yes. There's almost always multiple, possibilities to get there. Which one you prefer really depends on, how you want to deal with it. You could just decide to keep shared mailboxes only in Office 365 and not have them on premises, or manage them independently, not through DirSync, so keep them out of scope of DirSync, which don't make them really hybrid recipients per se. But I just want to, point out that there are some quirks and things that aren't available, and this one is a very common one that I know a lot of people have been asking for since pretty much the very beginning of hybrid, and we still haven't seen it. So maybe at some point in the future, Microsoft will decide to actually build this that remote mailbox-shared commandlet. Who knows? But in the meantime, there's a little workaround required in order for it to work. Now let's go to a very common scenario. Once you are in a hybrid deployment and you are managing recipients on a daily basis, at some point users move out of the company, or sometimes accidents happen. The delete button is never far away, and although that you should have accidental deletion protection enabled on premises, some organizations don't. Or you might be running an older version of Active Directory, which doesn't support all these neat features. So let's, for sake of making a point here, assume that a user account is accidentally deleted from the on-premises Active Directory, right? Well, what happens? It really depends on what your approach is. So if you notice that the user account has been removed and you have no option of reviving, restoring that account as it was, you create a new user account with the same name because that's just what you've been doing all along, then you might be in for a surprise, because that is definitely not the approach you want to take if you want to keep whatever is available in Office 365. And the reason for that being is very simple, because once you delete an object, so delete that object on premises, that deletion gets synchronized up to Office 365, that object is removed, and the mailbox, in this case, would enter a soft deleted state, which means it remains available in Office 365 for 30 days. Now, the way to restore that mailbox, if you will, is when you can revive the original object, or can make Office 365 believe that you revived the original object. So creating a new object, new user account, will not work. Why not? Because that new user account has a new object GUID, and DirtSync will not recognize that it was the same user as it was before, even though it might have the same email address and whatnot, and that could cause problems in Office 365 if there is no match. Which kind of brings me to a second problem related to this. If you delete a user account on premises, that deletion is synchronized in Office 365, but not all is lost. There is that Azure Active Directory recycle bin, right? If for some reason you decide to purge that deleted account from the Azure AD recycle bin, you're in a big pile of brown smelly stuff, because then it's gone forever. There's no way of getting it back or getting anything back that's in a hard deleted state. So that's definitely something you don't want to do. So my advice generally is stay away from the recycle bin. There are a few use cases where you actually need to remove them from the recycle bin, but before you do so, make pretty good sure that you're hurting yourself, or that you're not risking losing any data. So in this particular scenario, what would have been the better approach is that you just restore the on-premises object. And how do you do that? Well, you use the Active Directory recycle bin. Now, I sincerely hope that all of you are running or have the AD recycle bin enabled. However, if you haven't, then you could theoretically rely on a third-party solution that can restore an object using the same object GUID. Anyway, point is, if you restore the object, same object GUID as before, then DirtSync will see, hey, that's the account I deleted earlier, just there again. Let's create a new user account in Office 365, and when it tries doing that, Azure AD will see, well, I know that object. It used to be here. It's still in my recycle bin. Let me just revive that, and everything will magically start working again. That's really great. Okay. But let's assume, right, you're in the hybrid state, you don't have the AD recycle bin, or you don't know how to use it, or you just couldn't get it to work. Whatever the reason is, you cannot revive the on-premises account. There is a workaround which I like to call the reverse restore, right? Basically what it does is we're gonna restore the object in Azure AD, and we're gonna trick Azure AD in using a different account on premises. And the way that we do that is, first of all, pause directory synchronization to avoid any further damage, if at all. Right? Doesn't hurt pausing it. Then restore the account from the recycle bin in Azure Active Directory. Essentially what you're doing is you're recreating the account as a cloud-only account. But because you create the account, it's created with the object GUID in Office 365 that it knows already, and it retains its permissions in SharePoint, Mailbox data, and so forth and so on. Then you create a fully new object in the on-premises directory, and you make sure that you enable the object as a remote mailbox, which means that you do a new remote mailbox, or you do, enable remote mailbox command for that user account that you created, a brand new user account. Now, if DirtSync would run at this point, then you have a disconnect, right? Because the object on premises is not recognized in Office 365 as an already existing object. Now, there is a soft matching process that could use the SMTP address, but in this case, because it's really important that you don't lose access to the data. What I rather do is link the accounts together manually. The way that you do that is you can calculate the source anchor. Source anchor is literally the link between the on-premises Active Directory object and the Azure AD object, and it's based on the on-premises object's object GUID. So you take the object GUID, base64 encoded, you get a string. That string is a source anchor which you need to stamp on the object in Azure AD. So you go to PowerShell in Azure AD, you do set MSWL user, you define the source anchor, you copy paste the value that you just calculated based on the on-premises account, and then you launch directory synchronization again. You enable it, it syncs up into the cloud, sees that the object on-premises matches the stored object in the cloud, and it transforms the cloud-only account into a synchronized account, and you're good to go. You can then manage it again from on-premises. It's a little bit more work, but it's definitely better than just not being able to restore it altogether. Moral of everything here: make sure you enable those recycle bin in Azure in the on-premises environment, because it makes your life so much easier. So let's move away from the user accounts and talk a little bit about Office 365 groups, which is, by the way, a fabulous feature in Office 365, I believe. The feature is only available in Office 365, no on-premises groups, or not, distribution groups have been on premises, but the functionality that an Office 365 group has with document libraries and the notes and all that is not available on premises. So that's one thing that you need to work with, manage expectations. Of course, most of the time, everyone that works in Office 365 group will already be in Office 365, but sometimes, your organization might be very large. You might have decided to spin up a group awaiting everyone to come into Office 365. And on-premises users can still participate in those groups by sending emails back and forth, and they can even access files in those groups, but they will not be able to do so within their own clients. They can log on to the Office 365 portal and then through there access the group's files and notes and all that. But by default, if you don't do anything, you won't even be able to email a group in Office 365. Every group is like a distribution group, has an email address. Theoretically, you could send a message to that email address if you allow external people, or if you allow people to email to that email address. But even in a hybrid deployment, the premises for mail flow, because the accepted domains are set to authoritative, is that there is a matching object in the on-premises environment which depicts the group in Office 365. Now, by default, there isn't, because groups aren't synchronized from Azure AD to on-premises. In order to do that, you need to enable a feature which is currently still in preview called Group Writeback. You could theoretically just create a contact object yourself with the email address of the group in Office 365, and that works just fine, but it's a manual interaction. It's better or easier if you do that automatically. So, hence Group Writeback. Oh, that's a mouthful. So it's a part of Azure AD Connect, still in preview, as I mentioned, so there are some caveats, and the most important caveat here is that there is what I believe to be a bug in Azure AD Connect, that when you synchronize a group from Office 365 to Azure AD, from Azure AD to the on-premises directory, it shows up, just like in the screenshot that you can see there. It says group GUID. Based on the name that you see there, you don't necessarily know which group you're talking about, but however, if you open up the details of the group, you'll be able to figure that one out, right? So that's not really a big problem, but the problem is that they're not visible in the global address list. So in order to stamp those objects with the required exchange attributes, if you will have to manually run an update recipient on the group name on premises, and then call and update global address list, or wait for the gal to be, rebuilt or updated itself, and then they will show up in the global address list. And as of then, people can pick the group that they want to email to, rather than having to remember the SMTP address. And by having Group Writeback implemented, it also becomes automatically possible to email those groups rather than having or requiring admin interaccess. It's a fairly new one. I'm not saying that everyone's running into this problem, but if you're in a large, permanent hybrid where people will always be on premises and some people will always be in the cloud, I'm pretty sure that this is definitely something that you'll run into sooner rather than later. However, I'm pretty sure that Microsoft is aware of some of these quirks in their sync, and I wouldn't be too surprised if anytime in the future release of Azure AD Connect this will be solved. But until then, keep it in mind when you're working with it. Inherently, some limitations in Azure AD Connect also cause problems elsewhere. Public folders being one of them. Absolutely fabulous thing called public folders, which we've been trying to kill with fire for many years. They still survive today. And reality is that a lot of customers are still using them, and to be honest, rightfully so. Easy to set up, they work, they do what they need to do, people are used to them, and that's why it's so hard to get rid of those pesky public folders. As a result, a lot of organizations still create new public folders today. Some of them are even mail-enabled. Now imagine you're in a hybrid deployment and you use Exchange Online protection. By default in EOP, DBB, which is directory-based edge blocking, is enabled, which ensures that if a message comes in through Exchange Online protection, which may or may not be used to protect the on-premises recipients, will block recipients that it doesn't know. Right? And that's under the premises that EOP is used for all recipients that live in the organization, whether it is on premises or in Office 365. A new user that you create on premises, within 3 hours, that user is synchronized as a mail user into Office 365, and Exchange Online protection automatically picks up on that user account, and mail starts flowing for that user, and it gets routed to the on-premises environment. That's how it works. However, DirSync does not synchronize mail-enabled public folders. So, a new email address for a new mail-enabled public folder has no way to find its way automatically into Azure Active Directory. So, as a result, one of the workarounds that you could implement or should implement is setting up that synchronization of mail-enabled public folders. Those sync scripts are available from Microsoft. And what they will do is they will create sync mail public folders in Office 365, which represent the on-premises email-enabled public folders, which makes them available to people in Office 365 so that they can email to them, show up in the GAL, and so forth and so on. One would expect that when this happens, that Exchange Online protection automatically knows about these public folders and starts accepting external messages, provided that you've enabled external mail flow for those public folders. Unfortunately, that's not true. It doesn't do that. For some reason, Exchange Online protection doesn't pick up on that. So, basically, there's two options you have. Either disable directory-based edge blocking. You do that by switching the domain type from authoritative to internal relay in Exchange Online. The problem is that you open yourself up to mail routing or mail loops, right? Because internal relay is a somewhat dumber way of writing messages across two organizations. And what happens is if an internal or an external person sends a message to a non-existing recipient, Exchange Online gets that recipient, gets that message, reads the recipient, tries to find the recipient in Exchange Online, doesn't find it, and will just blindly forward it to the on-premises environment, which, depending on your configuration there, might be doing the same, and, you get a back and forth. Of course, there's some mechanisms in Exchange which, after a while, will pick up on the fact that the message has been bouncing back and forth and drop the message. But still, it's a situation you'd rather avoid than, having to wait for it to fix itself, because it's causing, or it's using resources, and in some cases, it could even, jeopardize the health of your environment. Regardless of that, it is one option, and I think it's the recommended option. Alternatively, what you can do is just drop the synchronization of the mail-enabled public folders and create contacts for them in Exchange Online. As a result, Exchange Online protection will pick up on those contacts that have the same email address for the on-premises mail-enabled public folders, and mail flow and mail routing will work through DBEB or even with the DBEB enabled. So it's a manual interaction, of course. If someone needs to create those contacts, you could set up a sync if you're smart with PowerShell yourself. But I'd rather see these being fixed in Azure AD Connect or the DirSync portion of it, so that we don't have to worry about this. Because, like it or not, public folders are there, and they're still going to be there for quite a while because a lot of people still use them today. So that's the reality. Another reality with public folders is something I have a hard time understanding, right? And not so much from a technical perspective. I understand why technically there are some challenges here. It's just something that baffles me that, we're what we are where we are today, and we still see these problems. So, for instance, if you try migrating public folders from on-premises to Office 365, then you're good to go as long as your public folders are, for instance, on Exchange 2010. Legacy public folder structure, then you can use a migration batch to actually move them over. And I had to do it not that long ago, and, for some reason it's pretty, I'm not going to say simple. There are a lot of steps to go through. One of them includes, syncing those or, syncing mail-enabled public folders and so forth and so on. But all in all, it works. You can get the data over to Office 365 pretty painless. But imagine you're a customer that's on the verge of technology, or not even on the verge of technology, but you're, on Exchange 2013 because a few years back you thought, hey, this looks like a really good Exchange version. Let's go over there. Let's move the public folders from the legacy public folder structure into these new modern public folder mailboxes. Well, I've got bad news for you. There was no way of migrating mail public folders, public folder mailboxes to Office 365 yet. I suspect yet, right? At some point, I really hope that Microsoft will come up with a built-in way to just move them like a mailbox, but you can't. So if you're in Exchange 2013, then, or 2016 even, then your only option today is to configure hybrid access, which means that Office 365 mailboxes get access to on-premises public folders, and you keep them there until there is some way to move them natively, or you have to resort to using third-party tools like binary trees solution. They have actually a pretty neat solution which synchronizes public folders in the on-premises or between cross-premises, between on-premises and Azure Active and Office 365. And as a result, by keeping them in sync, you can have those two repositories. It's kind of like looking at replicas from one another. You've got, all the public folders on premises, and you've got a replica of those in Office 365. And of course, there might be some drawbacks to this approach, or, you might have that synchronization delay, but it is a, pretty painless way of dealing with it, and it can also be used to move modern public folders to Office 365. So that's a very good alternative if you're running into this particular scenario. Another one, and this is a more tricky one, which I'm sure that most of the consultants on the call have already run into, is that when you have a customer that has, let's keep it at a, Azure or an Office 365 tenant, and they just acquired a different company, and they want that company to use their same email domain, for instance, controsa.com. Well, that is a problem because, first of all, let's start with the total non-option scenario. Both of them are using a different Office 365 tenant. Well, then it becomes a real big problem to share that email domain because you cannot register a domain in multiple tenants. So that's a big, big problem. Let's just take a step back and see, what happens if one of them is just using Office 365 and the other one has an on-premises environment. Well, you could set up internal relay domains, right? You configure each environment to forward messages for recipients that don't exist in that particular environment and have them forward that to the other environments, right? That works, right? You can make sure that messages, loop through the entire organizations until it eventually finds the recipient where the message needs to go through. Not very flexible, not very, fun to deal with on a daily basis, because there could be all sorts of problems like mail delivery delays because the message has to travel across different environments. And again, you open up your environments for mailing loops. Again, depending on the systems that are involved, there might be some trickery involved to avoid getting in into those continuous mail loops, but it adds complexity. Alternatively, and that's a solution that I've been using for a few situations, is that you rely on a third-party solution. So that third-party solution in this particular scenario, what it will do is it acts as a broker, right? It receives messages from outside, looks at for whom it is the or whom the recipient is, and then forwards the message to the appropriate environment, which could be Office 365, which could be an on-premises environment, or it could be the other on-premises environment. One of the solutions that I've personally worked with is Minecast, and it does that in a really neat way. You synchronize multiple directories with that one solution, and then the routing logic lives there. Some of the drawbacks is that some of the features in Exchange and Line Protection don't like to have another filtering solution, because Minecast can do much more than just intelligent mail routing, but it does allow you to add another layer of routing logic to it, based on all sorts of attributes, attribute flows, all sorts of if-then-else statements, if you will. And another nice thing is that solutions like Mimecast, whether you're going to use Mimecast in the cloud or maybe there is an equivalent on premises, they can often rewrite addresses on the fly on the way out, which gives you even more flexibility in some of the most complex situations. Either way, it's not impossible, but it is a very good and reliable way to deal with it. Now, sometimes I have a company that comes to me and says, well, we're not going to trust Mimecast for doing something like that. Then, the obvious reply I would give them is, well, hey, you know what? You're using Office 365, which is in the cloud anyway, so it shouldn't be that hard of a sell. Just something to keep in mind. Anyway, thought I might share that with you. Let's talk a little bit about cross-forest migrations, which is also quite common, quite difficult, very difficult to deal with. And what I'm going to talk about now is not per se a fully supported way of dealing with this. However, if you're knowledgeable in Exchange and you've dealt with these situations, then I'm pretty sure you'll appreciate how this works. The scenario is that you've got a company with a hybrid, and they acquired a company B, and they want to assimilate company B into Office 365. Well, one of the ways that you could deal with it traditionally is do a double hop migration where you incorporate all of the mailboxes of company B into company A, and then move those mailboxes using the hybrid mailbox moves into Office 365. Truth be told, if you can do that, that is a really good and really solid way of moving those mailboxes into Office 365. And I can highly recommend it. However, sometimes you don't want to go through all the trouble of doing that. You just want to get those mailboxes to Office 365. Well, what you're essentially trying to achieve is a cross-premises move between two organizations. And one of the solutions that even Microsoft uses is called a simple MRS migration. Essentially what it comes down to is you have to make sure that the Exchange attributes, or the necessary Exchange attributes from the mailboxes in Forest B get into Forest A and get synchronized to Azure Active Directory. Once you've done that, you unlock the capability of just moving, hybrid mailbox moving, mailboxes out of scenario B, out of the Active Directory of company B, directly into Office 365. It uses, the reason why it's called simple MRS is because it leverages the MRS move, just like a hybrid move, but it's simple because you don't have all the fancy hybrid stuff that works there. And of course, multi-forest hybrid is another solution, but that's beyond the point that I'm trying to make here. Right, so the simple MRS migration allows you to do all that, and one of the ways that you can do that is to use a prepare move request between Forest B and company A, or Forest B and Forest A, to get the attributes along and then just initiate the mailbox move. Now, I mentioned this at a very high level just to point out that there is a way to get around it. However, do not attempt this at home, kids, right? There is a warning. There is a lot of things that could go wrong in the attribute flow. If you've got that wrong, then you could make things worse. So if you want to do this right, and you don't have a lot of experience, let's say, with doing cross-forest migrations, then stick to the assimilate on premises first and move to Office 365, or build out a double hybrid or multi-forest hybrid. That's fine. Some of which are equally complex, I would argue. But just keep that in the back of your mind that this is not officially endorsed or supported by Microsoft, but it definitely does work. Right? Because that's how the onboarding center, for instance, moves some of their customers into Office 365 as well. Happily moving along, this is a quick one. Should you upgrade your hybrid to Office 365 or not? Well, it depends. I'm going to give you the consultant's answer, not because I am a consultant, but because it really depends. Assuming that you're in 2010, should you ever upgrade from 2010 to 2013 or 2016? The answer is no if you're just migrating. If you're just hoping to move mailboxes to Office 365 and then get rid of Exchange, minus the hybrid server, management server. No, just keep 2010 and move them happily along. If you're going to do long-term coexistence, then yes, there is a big case for going to 2013 or 2016. Even then, I would suggest that, do the 2010 hybrid, try and move mailboxes over to Office 365, and then when there's little use on premises left, then upgrade to 2013 or 2016, because that makes your life so much easier. Can you do that from the get-go and just upgrade first and then do the hybrid configuration wizard? Of course, because I'm not going to deny it. HDW is so much easier in Exchange 2013 and 2016. It's so much better than 2010. But it's not a requirement, right? It's nothing that, you must do in order to move to Office 365. And truth be told, I would love to see Microsoft build a sort of new HDW for Exchange 2010, because it still supports, not Exchange 2010, but the hybrid with Exchange 2010 is still supported. And it would make life for people using 2010 so much easier. But then again, until then, it's either a sentimental choice because you like 2013 better, or if it's a rational choice, then really think migration, keep the 2010 coexistence, consider upgrading if there is some really value that you're finding in 2013 or 2016. Then one of the things that a lot of people struggle with is migration throughput. Why is hybrid so popular? For a variety of reasons, of course, but it's also one of the easiest ways or the quickest ways to move mailboxes to Office 365. Now, generally, the throughput is anywhere between 1 or 2 gigs an hour, but it depends on a variety of items, like the performance of the source service. If you're, crappy on-premises servers, they can deal with 1 or 2 gig per hour throughput, then you'll never get that. If your internet connection is a 2 meg SDSL connection somewhere in the middle of nowhere, then you're likely not going to get a 2 gig per hour or 1.2 gig per hour throughput. That's the reality of things. And also, when you're migrating mailboxes makes a lot of difference, because Office 365 or Microsoft wants to ensure that everyone has an equal part of the puzzle, right, and part of the pie. Everyone needs to be able to share their bandwidth. So if there is someone hogging the bandwidth, then they're going to throttle you because they want to make sure that everyone has sufficiently available. So what do you do to avoid being throttled? Well, the first thing you imagine doing is, hey, you know what? I'm going to migrate all my mailboxes during the night because no one is using Office 365 at that point in time. Which is probably right. If you're in the European time zone at night, no one will be working in the European time zone, or little people will be. However, I don't think you're the only person that thinks of migrating during night or during weekends. There's other people as well, so expect some throttling there as well. Unfortunately, there's no way to reliably predict this is my throughput, that my sustained throughput through the migration, but doing a few test mailboxes and then, at the times that you actually want to move the mailboxes gives you a very good idea or estimation of what you can expect. That's definitely something to keep in mind. Now, another thing that affects hybrid mailbox moves is how people generally implement these hybrid servers, if you will. As I mentioned, they don't really exist, but for sake of explaining this, let's call these 3 servers hybrid servers, and hybrid meaning they interact with Office 365, for instance, for mailbox moves. And traditionally, how a lot of people implement it is they have their migration endpoint, which goes through the firewall to a load balancer, and then if it's Exchange 2013, they've implemented the Exchange 2013 logic of dealing with load balancing, and it hits one of the 3 servers, and there is no affinity required and all that. As a result, sometimes you'll see that those mailbox moves get stalled because they've gone from one server to the other server, which isn't a very desired outcome. What you want, however, is that every server can deal with a number of mailbox moves. So what you essentially do is you take a migration endpoint and then point it directly to server 1. and then you create a second migration endpoint, do that for server 2, and so forth and so on. Of course, it means that the certificates which are used on the servers need to have those endpoint names or host names in the certificate, but that way you can create, batch number 1 on server 1, batch 2 on server 2, and batch 3 on server 3. You create a affinity on each server, and you will notice that you speed up the migration throughput because you're essentially load balancing it yourself, if you will, without bouncing a job between servers. And it gives you a more predictable connectivity path. And for troubleshooting purposes, this is definitely a lot better as well. So this is, absolutely a recommendation I can give you. Now we're getting close to the end of the hour, so I'm gonna go over the last 2 items pretty quickly. But sometimes I get asked, well, earlier you mentioned that you need to upgrade to Exchange 2013, and if you do that, that's basically full migration, and that is true. It is a full migration. Sometimes people like to implement a hybrid namespace, which, to be honest, is a solution I loathe because it creates all sorts of really weird problems or potentially weird problems if you don't manage it well. And essentially what it means is that you're switching over only the auto-discover namespace. You're creating a new namespace for Exchange 2016. Let's call it hybrid.mydomain.com, which you're going to use to interact with Office 365. And you're keeping the legacy namespaces on Exchange 2010. And although that works, there are some quirks that you need to take into account from a client's connectivity point of view. And furthermore, this is not supported either, right? So you are going to switch over to 2016 fully at some point in the future, or maybe that's your point. Then, do it right from the get-go. Don't add complexity into the environment. If you're not thinking of switching to Exchange 2016, then you could have used 2010 to build the hybrid anyhow. So this is, the sort of approach that I've seen people use in the past in order to be able to use a newer version of Exchange. And although you can make it work, I'm personally not a big fan of it. So, just keep it as not supported and stay away from it. I think you should definitely be fine there. And then, to end this presentation today, the last caveat I want to talk about is FreeBusy in a post-2013 Service Pack 1 world. What do I mean with that? Well, prior to 2013 Service Pack 1, all FreeBusy requests in a hybrid deployment were done through the organizational relationships, which we've all grown accustomed to. Its Exchange Federation has been introduced in 2010. Okay, it changed a little bit, when we went from the, public instance to the professional instance of the MFG at some point in the past. But it's been consistently reliable or unreliable for some people. But we've grown used to the delegated authentication way through the Federation Gateway. Now in 2013 Service Pack 1, OAuth was introduced. If you're in a 2013 only or 2016 only environment, OAuth is configured automatically. If you're in a 2010, 2013 coexistence scenario, the HCW in 2013 or 2016 don't even offer to install or configure OAuth for you. Doesn't mean that you can't. You can do that yourself. But regardless of whether it's done automatically or you did it yourself, once OAuth is enabled, OAuth is going to be used for FreeBusy requests in your environment. And furthermore, it really depends on what version of Exchange you're sitting in, because if your mailbox is in 2010, it'll use the organizational relationships and the MFG. If you're on 2013 or 2016, you'll use OAuth. But from Office 365 to on-premises, it will only use OAuth. Which means that if OAuth fails, it doesn't fail back to the organizational relationships, which can make troubleshooting really hard. So this isn't as much as a recommendation to do something or not do something. It's more as hey, keep in mind that if your FreeBusy requests fail in a mixed OAuth DAuth environment, it's very likely that there is a problem with either OAuth or DAuth, and Exchange doesn't automatically fail back, which is something a lot of people think that if one doesn't work, it'll try the other one. That's unfortunately not the case. So this being said, I used up most of this hour to talk about hybrid gotchas, and I've got plenty more where that came from. But I do appreciate you guys showing up today. I hope you found it very useful, and if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with me, and I'll gladly answer them for you.
Thank you for that, Michael. I actually learned a couple of things from this, not least of which is your Photoshop skills. But it just goes to show the breadth of things that Michael talked about. Points out that there are a lot of seams in the hybrid picture so far, where different pieces maybe don't join up perfectly just yet. But we know Microsoft is working on them, but there's still occasional obstacles to overcome. So thank you all for attending. Our webinar master is going to take the recording and make it available, and we'll be posting a link to it on Twitter and on our blog. So if you want to be able to go back and re-listen to what Michael said, you'll certainly have the opportunity to do that. Michael, it looks like we have one question that hopefully we have time to answer. Do you want to take a crack at it?
Sure. Let me read it. So if a customer has Exchange 2013 and is smart host for sending and receiving email, we need to bypass the smart host for Exchange and Office 365 mail flow. Yes. So is it best practice to have a second external IP address open port 25 on this IP and give it an hybridcontrols.com a record and then fill in this? Yes. So essentially what you're describing here is a customer uses a non-exchange filtering solution in the DMZ, which quite frankly everyone does. I've seen very little people use the Edge Transport Server for that, which is, by the way, the only supported filtering solution, if you will, that can act as a gateway in a hybrid configuration, right? So in your situation, you don't have that. So because you don't have that, you must actually move or have Mailflow bypass it. And the only way to reliably do that is exactly as you described, right? Make sure that the hybrid configuration or the Office 365 platform can directly communicate with your, in this case, client access servers that accept the incoming messages. And the way to do that is just to define a new external namespace, smtp.hybrid.mailflow. Regardless if you want to call it, fill that into the hybrid configuration wizard for Mailflow, and then you should be fine. Exactly. Now, this being said, that's the official answer, and that's how you should do it. And when I work with a customer, that's how I tell them to do that. Now, there are these borderline cases where theoretically you could configure a third-party filtering solution to keep the X headers, which are required to maintain the hybrid experience, the hybrid Mailflow scenario. But based on what I just said, there is theoretically the capability to include the X headers and do this and that. It's a lot of ifs to make things work. So what you just described is by far the easiest solution ever, and definitely the only one I would recommend. So what if we have DirSync users to Office 365 and assign an Office 365 license with a Mailbox, and we want to set up hybrid afterwards? Are you familiar with the set AD user cloud only / replace? Familiar? Yes and no. So what you're referring to is a process called reverse hybrid, which first time we came up with that term was when I believe it was Exchange Server MVP. Paul Cunningham had a customer that wanted to do exactly that. So they moved from on-prem to the cloud, deleted everything on premises, including Exchange, no more Exchange, cloud only. Then at some point wanted to move back, and they wanted to move back to Exchange on premises, so they had to spin up a new Exchange server on premises, rebuild the hybrid configuration, and then get everything back to the on-premises environment, or a brand new on-premises environment. Problem there, mainly in order to move mailboxes back to on-premises, that's what I believe, right, is what you're up to, is that the on-prem environment lacks the attributes required to initiate the mailbox move or to allow for the mailbox move. So setting the AD user object properties on premises and making sure that all the values are there can be done in a variety of ways, including the set AD user one. But as long, and here the general idea is if you have the attribute flow right, then you can make it work. However, there's no built-in way to do so. Maybe there's third-party tools that can do that for you, and I'm pretty sure there is. But if you're very proficient in knowing which attributes you need and getting them there, then whether you do it automatically or have a tool do it, it should work. There we go. Welcome. One more question. So, is DFS Alternate Login supported, and works it with the new ADL authentication for Exchange Online? So, yes, that alternate login is actually supported, which was a very big shock to me because I'm not a big fan of alternate login ID because it causes all sorts of other problems. More specifically in the end user experience, it breaks the end user experience in a variety of ways. Interestingly enough, you'll find that when you use the new authentication methods, modern authentication, leveraging ADL authentication, as you described yourself, that will greatly enhance the end user experience, despite the fact that DFS Alternate Login ID has been configured. It does not solve all of the problems, but some of them. So yes, it is supported by Microsoft. Yes, you can do that. It is actually better to move to ADL if you do, but my recommendation would be stay away from it as much as you can and only do that if everything else fails.
All right, that's all the questions that we have time for. Again, we'll be posting a link to the recording on the ENow Consulting Twitter account and also our blog. So I encourage you to come back and grab it once we have it available. Michael, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you all for today.
Yep, you're welcome. Thanks, everyone.